Hey guys, I'm the 50s Kid. I'm doing a 5-speed manual swap into my E46 BMW. I've already done 2 videos in this series. I've done an introductory video showing you all the parts and stuff that you're going to need to gather before you begin your swap. I've also done a video on the shift pin, replacing the shift pin bushings in the 5-speed manual, because they do have a problem with the shift pin bushings sticking, particularly in 5th and reverse. So make sure you check out those videos before you watch the rest of this one. In this video, we're going to be removing the automatic transmission, which I've already done in a previous video, but we're just going to cover it again. And this time I'm going to show you a couple different tricks to hopefully make the job easier. Anyway, let's get started. So as you can see, I've already done some things to prep for this job. I've removed the air filter box. I've removed the disvalve, the upper and lower intake boots, and the little heat shield back here, along with the cowling up here. The reason we do that is because we're going to be disconnecting the engine mounts, and you can't do that on this side with all that stuff in the way. So anyway, yeah, we'll pull off those 2 bolts first thing, but before we do that, I want to show you some of the prep that I've done underneath. So you can see I've removed that lower skid plate. They're going to be 8 16mm bolts, 4 on the front, 4 on the back. And I have not only drained my transmission fluid, but I've gone ahead and removed the transmission pan as well. And I've gone one step further. I've removed most of the T40 bolts that hold the valve body to the transmission, but I've left one in the front and one in the back. This way, it's actually a little bit loose, right? And what happens because of this is that the torque converter will actually drain out half of its fluid, so that when you actually remove the transmission from the car, there's no chance of the torque converter falling out of there and then spilling transmission fluid all over the ground. Trust me, I've been through that like more than once, and it's really a pain in the butt. To me, this is easier. It's just a little bit more insurance to prevent that from happening, because more than likely, when you're doing this, you need to be using a transmission jack, and you're probably not going to be able to get your car high enough in order to slide the transmission out from the car with it still on the transmission jack. You're going to have to actually push the transmission off of your transmission jack onto a piece of cardboard on the ground, and then slide it out from the car on that piece of cardboard. And when you push it off from your transmission jack, the torque converter is going to fall out, and you're going to get transmission fluid everywhere, and it's a huge mess. And then you're going to have to be lying in it in order to get the new transmission in. So you want to minimize your mess as much as you can. So go ahead and just remove all those T40 bolts. You'll see the T40 bolts are the bigger ones, and the smaller ones are the T27s. You just ignore those, and you just leave this one and this one in a couple of threads, and you can see how it's loose here. And that's all you do. So now I'm going to tighten everything back up. I'm going to put all the T40s back in, put the pan back on, and then we'll proceed with the job. Okay, so we're going to get the engine mount nuts out of there. And the reason you want to do this is because we're going to be tilting the engine back a little bit as we remove the transmission, and you don't want it to actually pull the engine mounts apart. That can tend to happen, especially when the engine mounts are old. So to help prevent that, we're just going to remove the bolts from the top of them. You need a 16mm. And a swivel socket is, it's not necessary for this side, because you can actually get fairly straight on it without the swivel, but I'm using it anyway. You probably should be using this. So, and then I've got I believe it's a 16-inch extension and then a 10-inch extension here. So that's maybe a little bit overkill, but yeah, that'll just break that off nicely. Okay, and then I'll just get the nut with a magnet. And there we go. So yeah, you're not going to be able to see this side, no matter which way I position the camera. But basically, you can just see right down. You know what? Let me give you a shot of what it looks like. So there you go. That's what it looks like. Just that nut right down through there. Snake our extensions down through. And get on it just like that. Cool. Now we can get it off the floor. So if you are in a really rusty state, your exhaust bolts, these 4, there are 2 here, there's one here, one here, one here, and one in the back. Those 4 are going to be the most difficult thing on this whole job, probably. And one trick for getting rusty fasteners off is going to be to heat them up with a propane torch. And then a really old sort of trick that you can use is you can heat them up with a propane torch, and then you can use a candle to touch a candle to them, and that'll cool them off. And while it's cooling them off, the heat will sort of suck the wax into the threads, and then the fasteners will be easy to get off with just a wrench. So we're going to try that. I'm going to show you how that's done. Ideally, you want to get it heated up until it's red hot, which I have not done. I need a better propane tip for my torch here, but you kind of get the idea. Obviously, you would just do it for longer. But as you can see, you know, the wax has gotten sucked up into the threads there. So then you can just, here, you know what? I'll do it with a wrench. Because, you know, these are always hard to get off, even though I'm not in a really rusty state. They're difficult to get off unless I soak them, unless I use a big impact. So it's a 15 mil fastener, and, you know, it comes right off real easy, like there was nothing. And that one is, you know, that definitely feels a little grittier. So anyway, that trick definitely works, you know, if you've got some really rusty bolts. I've done it before on really rusty stuff where you can't even get it cracked free with, you know, a breaker bar practically, because it feels like it's going to break right off. But yeah, if you just heat up fasteners, they'll come right off. So next we're going to get the mounts off of the very back of the exhaust, and you can see I've got it supported with my floor jack, just a piece of wood to even out the load. And there are going to be two mounts. There's going to be one up in here and then another one up here in this corner. Okay, there's one that's in the far left corner, and then a very similar one in the far right corner. Those are both 13 millimeter bolts. See, I'm using this long 9-inch extension. Definitely helpful. So we're going to leave it supported here in the back. We don't need to support it anywhere else. I'm going to show you how to do this. Real easy. So the only place that it's still supported is going to be in the middle here on this rear one. This is just sort of a cover plate. These are all 13s, and we're just going to take them all off. Again, the end is still supported on the front of the engine because even though we just took the bolts off, it's still hanging there on the studs. And then, of course, it's supported on the back, so it's not going to fall on your head. But that'll fall on your head. So now we're just going to calmly and gently pull the exhaust back and lower it to the ground. So you just lower it to the ground in the front here, and then we'll go to the back and lower it down. There's a little vacuum line on here if you have a 330. You just want to take that off. There we go. And we just lower our exhaust down onto the ground. So we need to get off the bolts for this heat shield in the back here. There's one back up here and one here. They're both 10s. And then two more here. Okay, next we're going to disconnect the shift cable from the side of the transmission here. So that's going to be a 13 mil nut on the outside of here. And then we're going to hold this nut. So you just need to loosen that a little bit. You don't have to take it all the way off though. Okay, and then we can disconnect this from the bracket right here. You need two 16mm wrenches. And then that should just come out. There's a little hole for the wire to slip through. Tuck that here for now. So the reason you do that now is so that you can manually shift it into neutral. That way you can spin the drive shaft around so you can get it all the bolts. And then you can shift it back into park so that you have something to hold against. So over here, the drive shaft bolts are E12s. Just loosen them up here, then I'll spin them off with my impact. These are coming off pretty easily. Very nice. So go over here, shift into neutral, spin this guy around, and get those other three back into park. So this, the drive shaft's actually not going to fall right out of here because it's sitting in a little cup. We're actually going to need to pry it out. So for the front of the drive shaft here, I can slip my 18mm wrench up behind. So now I'll just shift to neutral, and then we can spin around and do the next one. Back into park, and that's the process, guys. So now we just need to get the drive shaft center support out, 2 13s. Should be some sticky stuff in there. So get that front of the drive shaft out. Now I'll show you how to get the back out. By the way, it's a good thing that I'm changing my drive shaft because center support bearing is a little noisy. The one I'm putting on there is much better. So to get the rear of the drive shaft out, there are actually little places where you can pry on it right here, but the problem is this brace is going to be in the way and I'm not able to actually pry and then pry against the little lip in order to push the drive shaft collar out. So what we actually have to do is remove this whole little lip right here. So we've got 2 10s here. Looks like 4 13s here, 2 on each side. Okay, these are 18s. Let's see if the Milwaukee has the juice. It totally does. Whoa. Okay, so now you can see that we've got the room to get in here and pry this thing out. So now it's coming out there. Let's spin it around. And there we go. All of that just to get the frickin' drive shaft out. Anyway, I'll put that brace back in because we're not going to need it to be out in order to get the new one in. So we're going to get the torque converter bolts out, and to do that we're going to need to spin the engine around. So to do that we're going to slip a 22mm wrench on the end of the crankshaft pulley, and we can just use that to rotate the engine around like that. Okay, so in here is this little cover for the torque converter bolts. I gotta get that out. So it's just that little black cover. And in through that little hole is where the torque converter bolts are. So we're just gonna rotate the engine around clockwise until we see the bolt, and I can see one right there. Okay, here we go. Slip that 17 millimeter on there. Hold on to the 22 on the front and crack it free and send everything flying. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna crack everything free, and then I can rotate, and then I can actually get everything off with my electric wrench. So now I can sort of automate this process. And it doesn't matter if I drop those bolts down in, because this thing's coming out anyway. Okay, so we got all 3 of the bolts out. The camera might have cut out on me a little bit. I might have lost a little bit of audio, but basically I was just spinning the engine around again and just getting them all out again with my electric ratchet here. And I've dropped 2 of the bolts down inside here, so you know, that's okay, not a big deal. Try not to drop them if you can. As you're taking the bolts out, when you're unscrewing them in whatever ratchet you're using, tilt down a little bit, and that should sort of receive the bolt down into it like a little cup. And if you kind of tip it down and out, you should be able to pull it out of there without it falling down in. The only problem with it falling in is it might get a little bit jammed up on the flywheel here. So yeah, so that's what you got to do. All right, so while we're down here, before we put the jack underneath the transmission to support it, and it's gonna, you know, it's gonna be in our way, we'll just crack the lower bolts down here. These ones are E10s. I'm not gonna crack them, we're gonna completely remove them. Those are those 2. There's another E10 up along the side. We'll get that next, but I'm going to pull out this big E14. Because it's on there. There we go. Okay, next we're going to disconnect this electrical connector here. It's like the range selector. Just got to give that a twist. Comes right off. So next we need to get the ATF cooler lines out from the side of the transmission. There's just a 13 millimeter bolt holding them on. And usually you can actually take this bracket off. There's a 10 millimeter nut right here, or a bolt. But mine's actually kind of rounded out, so I'm not going to take it out. And I'm just going to try to sneak up over top of it with this long ratcheting wrench that I have. Might be a little easier to do this after we kind of drop the end of the transmission. But then again, the transmission jack would be in the way, so I'm just trying to get as much done as I possibly can. There we go. So now the cooler lines can just unplug. They can just sit there. The transmission will drop away from them. Okay, so up on the side of the transmission here, it's going to be another 10 millimeter, or E10, I'm sorry. And hopefully you can see it. So I'm just going to get that cracked free. Okay. There we go. There's going to be 3 more main bolts that hold the transmission to the engine, and then 2 that hold the starter to the transmission. So one thing we're going to do to let the engine extend back as far as it can is we're going to get this little baffle out of here. It's just T30s on the other side. Pull that out of there. Okay, so now we can get the transmission mount off of here. It's going to be 2 13s on either side. Those are going to be nuts and washers. And then 4 13s on either side. So now I'm going to use the jack to lower the transmission a little. So there's kind of a place where it naturally wants to hang and then kind of go no further. So we can come all the way down to there, and then we'll just take up the slack with our transmission jack. So this mount member can actually come off. And set that aside. To remove this rear connector, you just flip it down and pull it straight outward. Okay, so now we've come to the part where I really can't film anything else. You can see the 2 starter bolts there, and then 1 bolt to the right of it. That one to the right is one of the top 2 bolts that you have to get out on the, that hold the transmission to the engine. There's another one to the right of it, which is sort of down there up in the corner, which I can't even get a shot of. But it's sort of right there to the right. And you're going to need a swivel extension to get that one. And then there's going to be one more down there. I think that would be it. That one is also an E14. So the 2 starter ones are E12s, and then you've got 3 E14s that you got to get out along the top there. Like I said, there's no way I can film this. I can barely even film it now. I can't crack it and film it at the same time. So I'm just gonna have to go ahead, get those bolts out, and I'll be back with you. I'm gonna show you the tools that I'm gonna use to get them out though. Okay guys, I had to actually give it up for the night last night because I was getting frustrated. I couldn't actually get my tool on that fastener. That's the one that's really hard to get to. It's off up to the side. And you need to actually have a swivel socket in order to get on it. As you can see, I've got a swivel socket on it. The reason I think I was having trouble is because, I think it's because I had the M3 engine mounts installed, and I think that they weren't broken. I think last time, as I seem to remember, my right side engine mount was broken. I didn't actually discover it until I, did my engine rebuild, but yeah, the top engine mount was broken the whole time, and I think that allowed the engine to sort of pivot backwards a little bit and giving me just that angle that I needed in order to get on that fastener. So now that either it's because I had the M3 engine mounts and they were just a little too stiff and the engine couldn't bend and contort the way I wanted, or my engine mount was broken last time. But either way, this time I wasn't able to get my tool on there for nothing. I tried everything. I tried 3 different swivel sockets and I just couldn't get it on. So I've gone ahead and removed the engine mount from this side and from the other side as well, just so that I'm able to move the engine around and pivot it and move it back and forth or side to side like this. And by tilting it to the side, that's given me the angle to be able to get on that fastener up at the top. Plus I can see it a whole lot better, and I'll be able to see the top ones a whole lot better as well. So I think honestly, removing the engine mounts is really, really helpful to this whole process. So as you can see, I've got the engine hanging down and I am under it. My jack is not under it. That's because it just sort of naturally stops in a certain position because the top of the engine sort of hits up against the bulkhead, so it's not going to tip all the way down, or the back of it's not going to tip all the way down and crush you, which is nice. I've also got that lower engine bolt back in. This is just to hold the transmission to the engine. That way I can get the top bolts out. That's probably the best order of operations. So here, I got that bolt cracked loose. I can just spin it out by hand. I think I got it. There we go. So I will try to give you some kind of view. I'm just kind of reaching up for those starter bolts. It's so much easier now that I can see them. Looks like I didn't put them on too tight this time, which is nice. Okay, I think that's off. Okay, so those are the two starter bolts off. It's probably easier to remove the swivel socket at this point. Okay, it feels like it's out. Now come over to this side one. This is going to be the last one. We got it cock free or crack free. And again, remember that lower one is still on there. Wow, ooh, I made this one tight. Wow. Okay. I gotta get the right grip on it. There we go. I'll tell you what, I'll leave this one on just a little bit and I'll get it off once I've got the jack on. So, you know, just for safety, I'm gonna get out from underneath the jack or from underneath the transmission, put the jack up here, then I can just get those two bolts out because I can actually get at them very easily. Let's go ahead and get that side bolt out. Okay, I think I've got that loose. Feels pretty loose to me. So I think what I'm going to do is go around with my long magnet, reach it up in there, and just get all the bolts out, make sure they're all free. They're all like not in there, not bothering anything. Okay, that should be every bolt, except I did forget one. There's a little bracket that holds the oxygen sensors on, so we'll have to get that, little 10 millimeter. Okay, so I hope you guys can see it. It's a little 10 right here. I got it. Okay. Okay, so it's totally loose. You can just come out, come forward. I'll jack it up a little so it can come straight out like that. Honestly, I'm wondering if I put the jack the right way. It might have been easier to have the controls in the back of the transmission. Okay, like that. There's a little, the cable is sort of clipped onto the top of the transmission. This cable is. You gotta reach up and unclip it. And that's it. That's as low as my transmission jack goes, actually. So you can see how much higher the whole engine needs to be in order to actually get this thing out from under the car. Either that or I'd have to slip the transmission off of the transmission jack. I actually bought really tall jack stands, 6-ton jack stands that go up 2 feet, and I think they're going to go up just high enough in order to be able to get this thing out of here. So I think I'm going to see if I could raise the whole car up, and maybe we'll be able to just get this transmission out of here without too much trouble. So yeah, it turns out I'm not going to be able to clear it after all. As you can see, that's about as high as I can get. It's not really the engine that is the problem so much as the subframe of the vehicle itself. So it looks like I am gonna need to be sliding this thing off of my transmission jack after all, which is, you know, what I've ended up doing every time. And I guess what you're gonna be ending up doing. Not a big deal. You just put a piece of cardboard behind it, and this one I can tilt the transmission back a little to kind of help it slide off and pop it right on off. So here is kind of what that looks like. think I'll tilt it down as much as I can. There you go. Not too difficult at the end of the day. Much, much more difficult getting it up onto your transmission jack when you need to put the automatic transmission back in. The way I've done it in the past is I've used, what did I do? I believe I used a floor jack underneath the front, underneath the back, kind of, you know, two different floor jacks. Got it up in the air, and then I think I sort of slid my transmission jack in from the side, sort of taking the place of the front jack because, you know, the body of the transmission jack needs somewhere to go. Pretty difficult. Honestly, that's probably the most difficult thing, is just getting that thing back up on there. I highly suggest help. If you had help, 2 people, it'd be a lot easier. So that's gonna do it for the transmission removal, guys. Honestly, I do think it's a game changer removing the engine mounts because it just allows the engine to sit that much lower. You can actually physically move it side to side just so you can get better access to those top bolts. You can see them better. So definitely remove your engine mounts. I mean, you're probably gonna be changing them anyway, right? The best way to do that is to leave this side bolted up, the left side, leave it bolted up top and bottom, and then jack the engine up by the oil pan. That way it'll pivot this way. If you don't do that, the whole engine's gonna wanna tilt this way because it's heavier over to the exhaust side. So if you keep it bolted in here, it'll pivot this way. Then you can get that engine mount out, set it down. I actually put a little 3/4 inch block of wood between the engine oil pan and the lower subframe. And then you can jack it up again, you know, after you remove this bolt, and it'll pivot up this way, and then you can remove that engine mount. So that's the way to do it. All in all, not too difficult a job as long as you have access to those bolts. Anyway, stay tuned. We're gonna do the conversion over on the inside. We'll take out the old pedals, put in the new, take out the old automatic shifter, and get everything ready, get it all wired up, ready for the transmission to go back in. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up. I'm the 50s Kid. Thanks a lot for watching.